with this module that I recently uploaded, we are now on the components of special and inclusive education. You've noticed that this is a very short topic, so I'm doing this pre-recorded discussion, okay? And in hopes that it may substantiate your understanding further on these components. Now, the prime reference of this module is the DepEd Order 72 series of 2009. Now, such DepEd order is a clear indication that the Department of Education, along with the educational system of our country presently, has services for special needs. Okay, so programs are laid down, policies are there. Okay, so in our Philippine educational system class, okay, with the Department of Education, there are components, 5 basic components at providing services to children or individuals who are experiencing or who are having special needs. There are varied spectrums, and levels of special needs. So the very crucial component, which is the foremost of all components, is the so-called child find or child identification. So in child find class here, picture this out because this happens in real scenario. You notice that there are individuals, there are children, there are adolescents who are having special needs class, but they're not at school. First factor, parents probably would hinder them from going to school for some personal reasons. Secondly, because they're not going to school class, they end up, being there, looking, tigpanawag o pasahero sa multicab, these are common scenarios, no? Comedic icons in the community, bugal-bugalan lang sa mga tao because they're not at school. They're out of school. They're part of the out-of-school youth or out-of-school children. Ganun siya. And literally, they cannot be enclosed at home. So in child find or child identification program, the DepEd, the teachers, and all those people who are part of this should identify them, and alongside with the identification is the so-called assessment. Because in doing the assessment, it should be regulated or administered or backed up by a certain professional regulated to do such kind of assessment. No, I'm talking about the special educator or child developmentalists or even registered guidance counselors for individuals who are going through mental health or emotional struggles. Okay, so that's assessment. And we also have the graduated approach, which we discussed previously, that in the graduated approach, it starts with planning and then action of the plan and then review of the plan. Pupil profiling is also part of that. More importantly in the assessment is the compliance to ethical standards. No, you can't just get into somebody else's home and then do the assessment. That's not the case. Okay, so there ought to be a respect for privacy, a respect for confidentiality, and more importantly, education to the parents of the child class about the purpose of the assessment and the educational services that the student or the adolescent, have the right to. So that's the basic compliance to ethical standards. Nevertheless, DepEd itself has its own guidelines and policies for the compliance of these ethical standards. The third component you notice is the placement. Now, placement or program options. In program options class, in the Department of Education, the division office there, in the division office, there is a particular designated supervisor or coordinator that handles special education services. So such placement or program options are being headed in that office. Okay, so as soon as your report based on the assessment and child find are in place already, before getting into the action, no, uh, you go to the division office, look for that coordinator or supervisor of this program, and then there you will be educated as to what to do next based on the report of the assessment. Let's see, yeah. So definitely the supervisor is very knowledgeable on how to help you, on how to guide you. Okay, like I keep on saying, this particular aspect of our profession class as teachers shouldn't be only done by us individually, but it's through the coordination and collaborations of a lot of people, okay? Including most definitely that supervisor or SPED coordinator in the division. So the fourth component is the curriculum modifications. Now, in the K-12 program, K-12 curriculum, I mean, everything is laid out already. No, what happens is that teachers are just implementers of what has been curated or provided by the curriculum. Now, that is a well-structured curriculum, man. And then here comes a student, no, after going through child find program, assessment, and program options, you are now giving him or her the educational services. Question is how? Considering that the curriculum is well-structured. So this is where modifications have to be made. And by saying modifications, I'm talking about adjustments to teaching methodology provided by the curriculum or instructed by the curriculum, adjustment to instructional resources, kana siya. And more importantly, adjustment to the assessment and evaluation method. Kaya by the end of it all class, no, ang pinaka-importante kay nakatuon ang bata, naka-eskwela na ang bata, okay, nakatuon siya, and wala siya, naka-cope up siya or wala siya na left out from the rest of the students. So that's why modifications really have to be made, no, in forms of accommodations, adaptations, etc. Now, the last component is the parental involvement. Now, in my previous lecture, I discussed about the three models of involving the parents: the expert model, the transplant model, and the consumer model. Diba? Kay having the parents involved is challenging already. Kana siya. Nevertheless, in involving them, education is necessary, and their trust also is a very important element in that process. Okay, they have, the decision is coming from them, man, of kanang of allowing us, to get into and then provide the services needed by the adolescent or the child, having specific conditions that presently is not at school. Now, among these components, class, there are three things that I want to emphasize. First is this depth order. In it, class, everything is in place already. No? Not to mention the policies, the guidelines, and the frameworks of the Department of Education, reaching out to children and adolescents who are not at school but are having specific conditions. Pero the problem is the implementation. Why do I say that? Because up until this point, we still don't feel exactly the essence of this depth order. There's still stigma, okay? There's still a problem on a lot of these children and adolescents are still being left out or even so disregarded and being mocked even by the community as an offshoot of that stigma. So you see, there is now a problem on the implementation. There is no problem with the plan, but the implementation, which actually is very important. Another important indication, there are only very few SPED teachers, working at schools because a lot of them even would opt to work abroad. There are a lot of registered guidance counselors, working at schools because a lot of them are in the academe, a lot of them are practicing privately, so making them not so accessible and reachable. So kana siya. So the problem, very few professionals, no? The common scenario is not all schools are having registered guidance counselors for the mental health and emotional struggles, and then very few not all schools are also having special education teachers. In fact, according to the person I know, only ang naara sa mga poblasyon nga eskwelahan ang naay SPED teachers. What about the rest of the schools? Okay, that's the problem. That's one contributing factor on the problems of the implementation of these programs by DepEd. Third thing is also third thing that I want to emphasize as well is kanang there ought to be an emphasis along with these components. There ought to be an emphasis also on educating the community. And by saying community, I'm talking about those people there, mocking individuals who are having special conditions. I'm also talking about the classmates at school. The moment the student is accommodated and adopted by the school. Okay, picture this out. Child find was successful already. Assessment involving the parent, curriculum modifications are in place, pero the stigma is still there. Stigma in the community and at school. So most likely, ang bata, di na niya mahuman ang school year, undang na pud na siya. No? Kay mo eskwela siya, katawaan ra gihapon siya sa iyang mga classmates, or that feeling of being stigmatized or stereotyped and still being mocked, or katawaan sa mga bugoy diha sa kalye kay ning eskwela na kuno si budoy, or whatever, however they would call it, kana siya. So one important component that have to be, I'd say, isolated and given also an equal emphasis is on the education of the community. Kana siya class. Siguro ang DepEd no nag-assume na kanang community awareness, community education, or school education is embedded already in each of these components. But I think it's not really working and it's not enough. It should be a separate component given an equal emphasis, along with these 5 components that have been laid out already. So panasiya. All right. So that's one challenge also of you as future implementers, curriculum implementers, and teachers. Okay. So in this module, you are expected to explain through your own words your thoughts, your perspectives of how this DepEd Order 72 series of 2009 are actually happening, in reality and in the context of the K-12 curriculum also. That's why I ask you to make a written report about these perceptions, following the instructions there, and also do not I don't want your written reports to be generalized. I want it to focus not just on your perspectives, or observations of the K-12 program as you scan and skim that website of DepEd. I want you to focus it in the context of these components of special and inclusive education. So don't forget that. Okay? So I hope you'll find time listening to this discussion. And should you have any questions or clarifications, you're free to message